Welcome back to another episode of the Stars and Stripes Cricket Podcast presented by DreamCricket. I'm your host, Peter Delapenna, and on this episode, we have part two of the interview with Emmy Award-winning sports TV director and producer Peter Steep. At the end of part one, Peter Steep was segueing into his time with the Stanford 2020 event down in the Caribbean that infamously went belly up when Alan Stanford was arrested on fraud charges and eventually convicted. But Peter Steep, who was on the TV production side of the cricket aspect of that event in the Caribbean, has a very unique take, and you'll get a chance to hear him go in detail about that, as well as numerous other things over the course of his broadcasting career. So we'll get to that interview. But before we get to part two with Peter Steep, I want to remind everybody that the Stars and Stripes Cricket Podcast is presented by DreamCricket. The DreamCricket store can help you fill up all of your cricket kit requirements, anything you need. Bats, helmets, gloves, pads, jerseys. Go to DreamCricketStore.com now and get 15% off your first order. DreamCricket Store also offers free shipping on all orders to over $200. So again, go to www.DreamCricketStore.com to take advantage of that great deal today. And also, the Stars and Stripes Cricket Podcast is sponsored by Moosa Cricket Stadium, the first turf wicket facility in the state of Texas. For more information, go to www.moosastadium.com. That's Moosa Cricket Stadium in Pearland, Texas.
At any point working on the broadcast and being part of the Stanford T20, did you see any red flags that made you wonder, where is all this leading to?
Well, I was just so happy to be part of it, and frankly surprised that we never seemed to have a pushback when we asked for something. It was the first high def broadcast of any kind in the Caribbean. We did like 28 cameras. It was great. It was like top level of coverage. And at the time, I just thought, well, this guy, he had all the reputation of being this big finance guy. And then, the British press started getting on him, I guess, not before the $20 million match, but even before that, with him, hanging out with the players' wives and some of the stuff that they claimed that he did with, going into the dressing rooms, which is supposed to be sacrosanct before a match, and things like that made me think, well, the guy's a little bit rough around the edges, but if he's got the money, why not? So but personally, I never saw any red flags. I was paid. I had some interaction with him, not much. That was left to some of the other people that were arranged with it, that had made the arrangements. But overall, I thought it was one of the great experiences of my broadcasting career. I thought it was fabulous, and I was just ashamed that it went away, or the way it shaped out that it did. That $20 million match was extraordinary. We got asked to do, in addition to the regular broadcast, Stanford said to us, well, we want to bring this to, as much as possible, we want to make the American audience interested in cricket. He was, he knew about that at the time. So he said, what we'll do is we'll do a separate broadcast with US coverage into the US only. And we all looked around each other at the production table. Okay. So what he did, he paid for a market analysis. He paid some company a boatload of money to go out and figure out, as an experiment, what would be the most beneficial place to put a specialized broadcast into the US for cricket. So they put all the information into a computer, spat it all out. Colorado Springs, it turns out, Peter, was the ideal place. So he then he got these marketing people to go to Colorado Springs and put the posters up and the banners on the side of the buses and in the pubs. And we hired a guy to host the US coverage who'd never even seen cricket, much less been involved with it. But that didn't really matter. We just wanted him to have some fun and bring this American perspective to this flashy game that was coming from Antigua every day. So part of that was him doing humorous or not so humorous pieces, apart from the cricket, which we had fun making. The best one, of course, was he wanted to go out and stand on the ground and with a bat and try and play cricket. So we got him all pads and helmets on there, and we had Curtly Ambrose and Courtney Walsh bowling at him. Now, those two guys bowling in tandem back in the day would just make batsmen not have sleep the night before they were supposed to play. Now, they weren't doing anything like they were when they were playing full time, but just the Curtly Ambrose off 3-pace run up is still the most frightening thing you could ever imagine. So some of the footage of this guy trying to face those two guys was maybe some of the most fun parts we did in the entire series. But that series, in fact, was just a fabulous thing to be part of, and we're just sorry it went away.
From your perspective, what is the Stanford T20 legacy in your eyes?
Well, in reality, it's every league in the world is their legacy. They were the first ones to do it. It was the IPL came out of that. When you think about it, look, if the guy was guilty of all the things he did, he deserves to be in jail. Now, not necessarily for the amount of time that he's been jailed for, but what he did behind the scenes was, a lot of people don't know, was bringing resources to resource-starved areas for cricket. All these islands that were part of his circus were on their bones trying to finance cricket, particularly for kids, and he brought in really much needed money. That legacy, I think, is still there, but it paved the way for the way the leagues are played now, in my opinion. He was a bit brash. He didn't do everything right, but he certainly brought attention to the game, and he certainly brought much needed financing to regional cricket in the Caribbean. And I think a lot of people are still grateful for that. And a lot of people would tell you that they're grateful for it, even though it may not be politically correct to be seen to be associated with that Stanford series for various reasons.
From a broadcast production standpoint, what do you think the legacy is of that event? Because there were a lot of things that were done even in that event that were new or different, or people in cricket were resistant to, or thought they were, if you think about the XFL, there's a lot of things with the XFL that are commonplace now in sports productions that nobody really remembers. I mean, the number one thing that the XFL did was the spider cam. There was no camera in that position ever in professional sports anywhere before, and the XFL did that. And a lot of people don't know that. They just think, they take it for granted now, especially kids growing up now wouldn't even know what the hell the XFL was or when it started. But, you have this wrestling promoter, Vince McMahon, who wants to start his football league, and he's trying to do something new and different. And there was some crazy and wild stuff like having a hot tub.
Oh, they spent some money. Yeah.
But, there were some valuable things that happened. People think now, like, when Australia had their first couple T20 internationals back in 2005, 2006, and you had all these goofy names on the back of the jersey, like Church and Punter and all that. He hate me straight out of the XFL. Rod Smart, the back of the jersey. He hate me, having something different on the back of your jersey that wasn't your actual last name. That's the XFL that brought that. Not, that's not something that happened with T20 cricket. And the spider cam, that's out of the XFL, and now it's in every NFL broadcast and a cricket broadcast,
and the bigger cricket broadcast for sure.
Absolutely. XFL did that. So are there any innovations that were part of your production doing Stanford that were new or different, or things that he tried to push, or just in general you were encouraged to experiment with new things? Well,
he wanted us to do have cameras on the umpires and all this sort of stuff, and it was just not viable in those days. Having live throws to players on the ground, that was a good thing. I mean, we've done that in Caribbean T20, we've done that in Super 50 all through the Caribbean. I mean, we may not have been the first to do it, but we're one of the first to have to be able to have the announcers talk to the players, and that's something that we'll be looking into more for next year for minor and major league cricket next year. But that sort of thing, the interaction between the players on the ground, the captain or one of the key players, I think is a good thing, and I think that's one of the things I remember. In terms of the coverage, it was fairly straightforward coverage, even though we had more cameras and more toys than you would expect at most Caribbean cricket events, with perhaps the World Cup exception, because in 2007 was the World Cup down there, and it was obviously at a top level as well. But in 2008, which is when we did the second season of Stanford, 2006 was the first year. Then there was nothing in 2007 because of the World Cup in the Caribbean, and then we did it again in 2008. I don't think there was anything innovative necessarily, except the entire concept of what he was doing. And broadcast-wise, we were just happy to be able to bring the full forces to bear to make it as good a show as possible.
Now, one of the other things you touched on there kind of briefly was a stigma still if you were associated with the event, or people have a stigma if you bring up Stanford, or if you were part of that event or not. 14 years later, you're doing just fine.
Yeah.
Did you genuinely feel there was a stigma afterwards? Did you feel you were?
I never thought there was.
People found out like, oh, Peter Steep was working with Alan Stanford. Stay away. Do you experience anything?
No, I never had that. I just know some people at maybe at administrative level more so than production level itself felt like they didn't necessarily want to be known to be part of it, and I think that was a personal thing on their side. From me and the guys that were involved in the production, I have no problem telling people. I mean, I'm proud of it. We did really good broadcasts there. We did a lot of them, and they were all at very good level. So as far as that concerned, no stigma per se for us. I think it was more from the administrators who didn't quite know what to make of him at the beginning. If any of the listeners or watchers of this show are interested in more of that, they should go to the BBC website and listen to that great series on Stanford. It's like an 8-part series on BBC about Stanford days, and you'll have your eyes will be rolling when you hear some of the stuff that went on.
Well, did you watch any of the Sky Sports? And I think it might have been put on Netflix as well. 3-part documentary that was done the past year.
Yeah, that was very interesting too. I didn't get approached on that, which is good. I didn't have any input at all in that, but I know a lot of the people who did. A lot of people complaining about people getting hosed on money. It always comes down to money, doesn't it? We were more worried about, particularly the $20 million game when the West Indies team won it. A lot of the players were obviously the Guyana-based players were encouraged by the Stanford people to invest the money that they'd received from winning that match back into the Stanford Bank in Guyana, and that was one of the first ones that closed when it all crashed. So some of those guys didn't get out all the money they wanted, unlike my colleague in cricket, Chris Gale, who took the money and bought cars and things. He got it early. He spent it all, so he didn't worry about putting it in the Stanford Bank. But no, it was just a great experience. He was so serious about the look of it and the presentation of it that he was really, in some respects, he was ahead of his time. I can remember going in one day where you parked. You've been to the venue there, Peter. In the days when Stanford was running it, when you brought the car into the parking lot, you weren't allowed to. A lot of people used to like to back their cars in so that it was an easy drive out into the spots. No, you couldn't do that. You had to drive in nose first, because Stanford didn't want the exhaust fumes of the car going onto the plants and the grass. And he'd have guys go, I actually saw, this is true, I actually saw one of the workers there cutting the grass with scissors to make it even level in the parking lot. So that was the level of attention to detail that he made everyone face, and the ground was always immaculate. And he had built the little stadium, the pavilion there, based on the ladies' stand of the Sydney Cricket Ground, was the original idea. So he was different, and it's just a shame that it went the way it did. But as we said before, I think there is some legacy there, that it brought attention to T20 franchise leagues, and look what's happened now. I can't keep up with them all now.
Oh, you and me both.
Yeah, it's like
in one ear and out the other. Each T20 game in a lot of ways is forgettable. I can't remember anything that happens from one match to another.
We did the Caribbean T20s before there was anything like CPL, and I produced every one of those Caribbean T20 matches, and I can only remember a few of them, because you do, after you've done a few hundred T20 matches, they do tend to run into each other. I do remember the Queen's Park Oval was one of the most amazing places you could ever be when it's full, when it's a full house there and Trinidad's playing and playing well. We had the broadcast room is at the northern end of the ground, and sometimes I'd be there directing show, and the guys couldn't, even on the PL on the radio, where you can't hear a thing. It's so loud from the crowd who's just above you. We had trouble communicating because of the excitement in the crowd, and that was Caribbean T20 days before CPL even. So, there's nothing like a full house at a Caribbean cricket match.
going back, one of the other things you brought up, I want to talk about. You start off with golf. You said in Australia
Yeah.
you were doing feature film stuff. You had
Yeah.
a credit in Crocodile Dundee, and then when you got to the U.S., first off, what brought you to the U.S.? Was it your wife, or was there some
Yes.
other thing that
That was my
happened?
wife. She dragged me kicking and screaming to Queens, and thinking that I'd be here for 2, 3, 4 years. Go back to Sydney. That was in 1988, and I'm still here. So, I had to find something to do, I suppose, to keep staying here. And now, just to be clear, in the film days, I was a logistics guy. I was production management more. I wasn't producing or directing films. Totally, as a person looking after the behind the scenes. But like I said, coming to the US, the job that I had down there didn't really exist here because the film business here being so specialized. There were companies that did just one thing, doing it very well for all the films. So I kind of drifted into TV, and a friend of mine on the West Coast asked me if I wanted to, come to Pebble Beach, and who wouldn't want to do that? Everyone who's played golf wants to go play Pebble. And I said to the guy, "Do you get to play?" And he goes, "No, it's the US Open. You don't get to play while they're playing the US Open there." So I did get to learn some things very quickly about the broadcast business there. And, I've done, I don't know how many US Opens and Open Championships and, Shell's Wonderful World of Golf. I don't know if you're ever familiar with that. I produced 37 of those, the 43, or 36 of the 43 of the modern series. We went all over the world doing golf. It was a great job doing the golf. And that was because I couldn't get into cricket. There was no cricket in the US to do. And at that time, that was prior to, having the opportunities in the Caribbean that I ended up having. So it was golf and tennis and Olympics.
It's still not a bad place to go. Pebble Beach. I'd take Pebble Beach over cricket.
Yeah, that's right. No, but I was always just starved. I couldn't even swim in those days. There was no willow cricket. Willow cricket's only been around about 17 years, and we couldn't watch cricket on TV here. So I'd have to go home to the cricket. My best friend would pick me up at the airport at 9 o'clock in the morning in Sydney. I'd straight from New York, and we'd go straight to the Sydney Cricket Ground, and straight off the flight.
Well, one of the things I tell people when I first got into cricket, again, growing up in the US, so you say Will has been around about 17 years. Yeah. So going back 2003, 2004, 2005, that's essentially when Will kind of started to get off the ground. And at the time, it was just an online only service. They didn't have a TV channel. So you had to subscribe online, and I had no concept of it. I had no concept of cricket anywhere in the US growing up in New Jersey. And so when I went to Australia for my semester abroad, and this is in context. So growing up in New Jersey, I didn't know it existed, but finding out after I came back from Australia, I realized, like you're talking about, there's cricket all over New York, Corona Park, there's Casino Boulevard, and underneath the Triborough Bridge in Randall's Island, there's cricket at Randall's Island. There's cricket all over New York City and Staten Island and everywhere else. And in New Jersey, there's cricket all over New Jersey, right 10 minutes away from where I went to high school. There's cricket grounds. I went to high school in West Orange at Seton Hall Prep, and in Newark at Columbus Park and other parks around Newark, and in Weequahic and other parts around Montclair, Newark, West Orange, Bloomfield, that area. There's cricket grounds all over the place that were like 5 minutes away, and I had no idea that they were there growing up, and I had no idea that people were playing, but they were there. And in Edison and Princeton and all these areas, there's cricket grounds, right?
Yeah, it's big in New Jersey. Yeah.
I had no concept of cricket in America, especially cricket right under my nose. And so when I was on the plane coming back from Australia on my 14-hour flight on Qantas from Sydney to Los Angeles, I'd just gone through this experience, immersed in the 2005 Ashes, and was so sucked in, and that's what got me hooked into cricket. And I'd gone to the New Year's test against South Africa that year in 2006. And I went to all 5 days, and I just couldn't get enough. And I thought, I have to take advantage of this, because when I get back to the US, for all I know, I might never see cricket ever again. And so I want to burn this in my mind. And so when I was on the Qantas flight back, 14-hour flight, they had this 2-hour Ashes highlights package retrospective that was produced by SBS. And it had Simon Hill was the host with Dean Jones and Greg Matthews. And I watched that thing 7 times in a row on a loop on the 14-hour flight.
Yeah, because
I could. A, it was an option. I wasn't interested in anything else in the in-flight entertainment system options. But B, I thought to myself, I have to burn this in my memory. I have to just
Yeah.
commit it to memory, watch it as many times as I can, because when I get off this plane, for all I know, I'll never see cricket again. And I don't want to forget this because this was so special. And then
Yeah.
afterwards, I come to discover, wow, there's all this stuff that's happening in cricket. But yeah, for the first 17 years that you're in the US, from 88 to 2005, really, in that time frame, I mean, to what extent, up until you got involved in the pro cricket, the production, the television broadcast production of pro cricket in 2004. I mean, from 88 to 2004, you talked about before you played a little bit of club cricket here and there, but what was your concept of cricket in America, and how did you first then get involved and get opportunities to do cricket from a sports production after having gotten started in golf and tennis and Olympics?
Well, I had the first question you asked there, that I had no concept that, like you, that there was really any cricket played at all in this country. It just was a blank. And until, like, it was mid-90s, or it could have been the early 90s, I saw an ad come up. I must have been through the Australia Society, where, the expat Australians would hang out Friday nights and do a networking meeting on a Friday night at the Australian Consulate on 42nd Street and 5th Avenue at the time. And through there, we were told that Australia was going to play Pakistan at Randall's Island. We went, what? Australian cricket team? Yeah, they're both on their way back from a tour or something that was going on. I can't remember the exact year. I'd have to go look it up. So we traipsed out on the weekend to Randall's Island, and we sat there on the side of the hill. Now, of course, it's where that track and field facility is there now. But
Icon. It's called Icon Park after Carl Icahn, I think was
Icon. Yeah, the Icon Park. Now we watched cricket there. The Australia was a full team. So we saw Javed Miandad and Imran Khan playing. We saw Alan Border and Mark Taylor and all these guys playing in New York City. It was so incongruous to me at the time that I was astonished and there was a really good crowd there. So I thought, well, if I can see Australia and Pakistan play in New York City, pretty much anything can happen. So having worked in all the other sports, as you mentioned, I kind of made a bit of a pest of myself to some people that were doing cricket in the Caribbean, and I kind of got in the sideways door down there, and I ended up being hired. I was put on a contract by Cricket West Indies to produce all their regional cricket and some of the international, which was outside the remit of their existing international contract at the time with IMG. But I kind of burrowed my way in there and I've kind of stayed there ever since. And now that there are opportunities in the US, there'll be even more cricket here. At the time, I had done some cricket in Australia, and I did a little bit in the UK as well. And I did follow the cricket, obviously, as much as I could, being based in New York and without the resources of Cricinfos and all the websites that are available now. But part of going back home every year was going to the cricket. Always timed it perfectly to first test into Brisbane. First test of a series for the home summer. I just timed it that I had to go there. I tell my wife that I need to go there for some business reasons. It always happened. If she figured it out, I always happened to be around about the time the first test match started in Brisbane. So, but now, of course, cricket being the way it is, TV-wise, you can turn on anything. And I remember you mentioning some time ago on one of your broadcasts about the fact that you can watch literally anything in the US cricket-wise, more so than you can in other countries.
Well, definitely in Australia. I mean, the cricket access in the USA is 10 times greater than it is in Australia.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it really is. I mean, you can't watch, if you're in Australia, you can't watch, India play South Africa unless you go subscribe online somewhere now. I guess you can. But in the US, you can just, as you've pointed out, you can just turn it on and put the DVR on and you can watch any match you want. It's great.
I just found it. Australia versus Pakistan. They called it on Cricket Archive. It's called the North America Cup. And if you go on Cricket Archive, there's lots of scorecards like this. Games played either in Mount Vernon, which is just outside the Bronx for people who aren't up to their New York geography, or Downing Stadium, which is the traditional name of Icon Stadium on Randall's Island. But this match, May 12th, 1990, Australia versus Pakistan.
Fantastic.
David Boone is listed as the captain.
Yeah.
You've got top to bottom, Darren Lehman, Dean Jones, Jamie Siddons, Steve Waugh, David Boone, Ian Healy, Peter Taylor, Merv Hughes,
Yeah.
Merv Hughes, Chris Matthews, not Dean Matthews, Chris Matthews from Western
Okay.
Australia. Okay.
Yeah.
Carl Rackman and
Yeah.
Terry Alderman. That was the 11 for
Well,
Australia.
not bad, huh?
And they made 152. It was a 40 over match. They listed it as all out for 152
Yeah.
in 29 overs. Dean Jones top score with 79. And then for Pakistan, Australia won by 5 runs. They bowled out Pakistan in 29.1 overs. Pakistan 11, Zakir Khan, Saeed Anwar, Ramiz Raja, Salim Malik, captained by Imran Khan.
Yeah.
Javed Miandad, Wasim Akram, Salim Yusuf, Mushtaq Ahmed, Walker Yunus, and Aqib Javed.
That's not a bad lineup, is it?
So in an era, again, 1990, when you don't have an option to watch cricket on TV, you want to see cricket from America, you have to go physically in person or get a VHS tape mailed to you and see if it gets through customs from Australia. Otherwise, you have no option to go to cricket. So this was it. If you don't go, you can't see any cricket.
Absolutely astonishing, and we only found out about it because of the tight-knit Australian community. It wasn't advertised anywhere outside that. We just found out that obviously the consul general office was helping with with all the bureaucratic side of it. So that's how we found out about it.
Now this is another thing I love about this. This is at the bottom of the notes for the match on Cricket Archive. Now again, Australia 152 all out. Dean Jones, 79, David Boone, 31. Nobody else got into double digits. And then Ramiz Raja, 53 for Pakistan. Imran Khan, 14. Salim Yusuf, 51. Nobody else in double digits. Notes at the bottom. This is hilarious. And it says Walker Yunus took a hat trick.
Yeah.
He got.
I knew someone did. I just couldn't remember who did it. I wasn't going to try and date myself.
Yeah, Walker Yunus got Dean Jones, Chris Matthews, and Carl Rackman. That was his hat trick. Okay. Now, so it was right at the end of the innings. Here we go. But right below it, this sums up cricket in America historically in these kind of situations. The match was originally scheduled as a 40 overs game, but did not get underway until 1:30 p.m. after the organizers found that the clay base of the intended pitch, over which matting was supposed to be tacked on top of it, the jute matting wicket, clay base was wet after rain seeped under the flimsy covers. A makeshift pitch was then devised, but proved to be very poor.
Yes, that's right. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? And I don't know whether those lines that you just read, Peter, would be that much different these days to some of the venues that we see cricket at in the US, unfortunately. But hopefully that will change with the infusion of interest and resources into Major League Cricket.
Of all the things that you've gotten to do outside of cricket, you mentioned the golf, but Olympics. So when you're working Olympics, what's the favorite thing you've done in terms of production wise on a sport at the Olympics? And what's your favorite place that you've gotten a chance to go to for the Olympics? Or are you doing all these things remotely? Are you actually getting to go to the countries, or is it remote work?
Well, the last two I did remotely. Earlier this year, the Beijing Winter Olympics, I did in Stanford, Connecticut, and the postponed Tokyo Summer Games, which was done last year, 2020 game, which was played last year, which were held last year because of COVID. I did both those from Stanford, but all the others I've done at the venues. Atlanta Games was my first. But you say, what's the best thing? We have a joke at NBC. The best thing you do about the best thing about Olympics production is the flight home. Because the 18-hour days do kind of get to you, and I'm a little bit old for that now. But fabulous experience, and when you get asked to work on your first Olympics, and you're so excited you can't believe it. But having done so many of them, I know that it's a grueling job. You're relied upon by a lot of people, and there's a certain level of production expertise that's expected of everybody at whatever job they're doing. And it's a massive undertaking. I mean, the Athens Olympics, I think, was one of the most interesting ones for me because the size of NBC's footprint at the International Broadcast Centre was just astonishing. They had, I think it was the high then, we had 5,600 people there in Athens. I think that was the high watermark for production. And
just NBC alone.
Just NBC alone, yeah. Just ridiculous. Now this year, in comparison, well, Tokyo last year for the Summer Games, I think we had 1,700 in Stanford, and then about another 12 or 1,300 in on site. So the advanced technology these days means you don't need as many people on the ground. You can do a lot more remotely, and you'll see that going on. It'll be even. There is a core group that needs to be there, of course, but there is more and more remote production. And but it didn't feel at Stanford, the facility, it didn't feel like there was that extra. There was so many people, it just felt like normal time up there. But problem this year in the Winter Olympics was that we had the Super Bowl in the middle of the middle weekend of the Olympics was the Super Bowl. So we had, there was quite a strain on the resources at Stanford based on doing an Olympics and a Super Bowl at the same time. But that's all part of the fun. And the check is still the same at the end of the day, right?
Now you say that. I wanted to ask about this because you touched on this at the start of your interview when you said that your favorite part, the running joke is the favorite part is the flight home. I've worked enough events, whether from a writing standpoint or photography standpoint or on the broadcast itself. I've gotten to the stage. I don't want to say I'm cynical about this, but when some people ask me what's my favorite game I've ever covered in cricket, I always tell them when Oman was bowled out for 24 by Scotland in February 2018, because it was supposed to be a 50-over match. And we were in and out of there in 90 minutes. And I had 6 hours that I wasn't expecting to have at the start of the day that I had time to do. And I enjoy that so much. And I still got a full paycheck for covering the match, whether it went an hour and a half or 8 hours.
There you go. Yeah.
And so on the flip side of that, when I'm doing ball by ball commentary for Cricket Info in particular, for example, right? If I'm doing the online text and I'm assigned to do an IPL or a CPL match, the games I hate the most, any game that goes to a super over.
Yeah,
because
of course.
You're counting on the game to end 3.5, 4 hours. If it's stretching 4 hours, it's kind of a nuisance. But then all the fans at home are watching, and I'm sure the CEO and business executives, ratings bonanza, going to a super over. Oh, we love this super over. Oh, this is the height of drama. This is amazing. What is, we're dying for a super over. And there were some matches this year in the IPL where I got towards the end of the season, people were sending in comments into the comment section that we can see internally on the Cricket Info Ball by Ball, and they were saying, "Oh, please let this be the first super over match of the season." And I'm saying, no, not while let somebody else have the super over match. I don't want to be working a super over match because it's going to delay my day and delay my dinner by another 45 minutes. And please, that's the last thing I want.
We have a saying in the truck when we're doing cricket: no one is allowed to say the word in the truck. If they are, they get kicked out of the truck. No one is allowed to say that word that starts with an S if you're getting close down to the wire. So, no one wants to do it because, it does cut into your drinking time.
So from a time standpoint, it works, and you don't get paid extra. At least I've never gotten paid extra for working a Super Over game. The paycheck's still the same. So from that standpoint, yes, it's a nuisance having to work that extra time. But how do you exciting. How do you balance the nuisance of having your post-work downtime and relaxation time interrupted by a super over or anything else in cricket, that goes, if you think back to the World Cup final, going into the super over, you've already been there for 8 hours. You got this last ball drama. And I'm thinking to myself, I was in Canada at the time working the under-19 World Cup qualifier for the Americas. It was the USA-Canada match that day. I was working at the same time, and I was on the broadcast for that. But I'm thinking to myself, oh, poor bastards working that New Zealand-England final. I'm not jealous of them. They've got to stick around there for another hour. So
that's right. I mean, we they are fun. I mean, you just want to make sure if you're producing a super over, you just want to make sure you don't miss anything, because the time not to make a mistake is the time when you missed a minute with the winning run. But I guess that could be also said about at any given stage during the match. But super overs, just as you say, at the end of the day, you'd rather, particularly if you've done a double header, or if you've done a 50-over match and there's been an hour and a half rain delay, and then you've got to keep going and then keep going and keep going. But it's all part of the fun, and I'd rather be doing that than digging roads around Queens.
But when you are in that situation, when you're being stretched a little bit more than you anticipated, what is the most enjoyable part, and what do you get the most satisfaction out of when you're deeply immersed in a broadcast and you've got all sorts of things happening? You're in charge of however many camera angles and camera operators and communicating with the commentary crew, and switchers and all these kind of things that go into a very intense moment. I mean, what do you get the most enjoyment and satisfaction out of when that situation arises on a cricket broadcast or any sports broadcast that leads to that moment?
Well, when you're doing that in that situation, just knowing that you've presented the images in the way that you'd like to watch them yourself at home, that's very gratifying. That, you know, when I'm watching cricket particularly, I know what I want to see, and you want to tell the story. As I say, it's the definition of the perfect film is a good story well told, but that can also be the case in a good sporting event, particularly cricket. If you can tell that story at the end, the NBC kind of bangs it into your head. Read the Olympics, tell the story. But it seems trite and repetitive, but it's true. If you tell that story of not just the super over, but as a thrilling draw in a test match or a last over win in a white ball match, as long as you present that looking what you've just made the right decisions in which replays to show, you've made the right decisions on which reactions to go to, and you made the right decisions on who the commentary team are at the time to handle a situation like that. So it's all very gratifying because, as I said, I always plan to have people around me that are much better than me, and it makes me look better and makes me feel more comfortable when I walk into the compound. So I'm always grateful to have those people around. They know what they're doing, and everything just falls into place. It's great. Other cricket directors will tell you the same thing. Just stay in the moment and make sure that each ball is presented to the viewers the way you'd like to watch it at home.
The Stars and Stripes Cricket Podcast is presented by DreamCricket. DreamCricket Store can help you fill up all of your cricket kit requirements. Anything you need: bats, helmets, gloves, pads, jerseys, and more. Go to DreamCricketStore.com now and get 15% off your first order. DreamCricket Store also offers free shipping on all orders over $200. Again, go to www.DreamCricketStore.com to take advantage of that great offer today. This episode of the Stars and Stripes Cricket Podcast presented by DreamCricket is also sponsored by Moosa Cricket Stadium, the first turf wicket facility in the state of Texas, and now the first ODI-accredited venue in the Lone Star State, located at 5515 McKeever Road, County Road 100 in Pearland, 5 miles off the Bailey Road exit from State Route 288, a half hour south of downtown Houston. Moosa Cricket Stadium includes fully enclosed locker rooms and change rooms, plus shower facilities after a day's play, as well as outdoor nets for all your training needs. Moosa also has 2 nursery grounds on the north side of the stadium boundary available for use. For more information, visit www.moosastadium.com. That's MOOSA Stadium.com. Moosa Cricket Stadium in Pearland, Texas. And now back to the episode.
The most physical representation on a cricket broadcast or any sports broadcast is obviously the play-by-play and the color commentator. But there's so many people behind the scenes that, again, you've touched on, you've been a part of. When people are kind of talking about a sports broadcast and who their mentors are, commentators always come up. But from a production standpoint, a director standpoint, who are the mentors that you had who you feel helped shape you and your style to get to where you are today?
Well, there's a guy who's never done cricket. He's a New Jersey guy, Jim Walton, who probably taught me more about TV than anything, than anybody. And he's just, he was just a born sports freak, and just understands TV. We've done golf for decades together, and we do the Grenada Invitational track and field event. We do a bunch, and we've done tennis. We produced Bermuda Open tennis for 10 years. He's just a great source of knowledge for TV. He taught me a lot. But in terms of directing, there's a guy in Australia who had a very, very different view of things. He was quite raw in his descriptions of things on the air, and he would come to work in shorts and flip-flops, and he didn't care about the suits. He didn't care, and he just got the job done. And his style, the way he directed the Stanford series, and I was the producer, but he was the director on that show, and he just said to me before the series started that first year, he said, "Just stay out of my way and I'll do most of the work." And okay, this is fine. So I could in the producer role, there are very different things you do than a director role. And I just let him go, and he was, well, it wasn't me letting him go. He just went and did his thing, and I was just in awe of the way he brought that to the world. And so there are a few people that you get impressed with early on, or some people that may impress you the wrong way, and you want to do it differently. But those two guys, had the most influence on me in the way I produce things. And there's another guy. There's a few directors. The cricket directing world is a fairly small club in the world when you think about it. And at the end of the day, I guess you're all doing the same thing, and each person thinks that they might be bringing something a little bit different, but you're not really. You're just, you're telling a story through other people's cameras. And, I can't say that I do it any better, or hopefully not worse than anybody else, but there are certain things that I bring to it from a US broadcasting perspective that's different, because a lot of the cricket, traditionally the cricket directors and producers are, from the UK or Australia or India that get the most work. And there's a certain way of doing things from those backgrounds that are very different than learning. So I learned the broadcast business in the US before I was doing bigger cricket matches. So I brought a US perspective to the way a truck or an outside broadcast works. So that's a little bit different. And I don't know whether that's better, but I did get some odd views on things when I first started doing cricket regularly in the Caribbean, because they were used to having a production done in the style of Brits coming out there all the time and doing it their way. But at the end of the day, you're showing a sporting event on TV. It's not rocket science. I'm just grateful to be asked.
Let me ask you this. There's a school or a philosophy point of view where you learn a lot more from your mistakes than you do from the things you do right. I've got a photographic memory for all the photos I've screwed up that would have been great photos that nobody will ever see.
That's right.
And it teaches me, or, being in the wrong position where, if I had a different angle, or I was at a terrible angle, and it taught me a lesson, like if I want an end of shot sequence, like I've got to be standing here, and this where I thought was
where to be. Yeah.
It's completely useless. And you learn those things, or I learned them through mistakes, making errors to never commit them again and get myself in better positions going forward, be in the right spot. So for you, what would you say is a great mistake that you made early on, whether it was in one of the other roles you had or as a director on a broadcast, that taught you early on this was a hard lesson and never to do it again, and it's helped you to become a much better broadcaster and be in the business as long as you have now?
Well, a couple of things. Doing homework on what you're going to be doing, whether it's a highlights producer or a director or whatever, does make a difference. And it might sound trite. I mean, Leia's the old dinosaur telling the young guys how to do their job. But it really helped serve me. Do your homework before the match about who's playing, what the situation of the series of it is, those sort of things seem very simple, but they're really important. And the other thing is, I've been caught a couple of times early on making the mistake of directors watching TV. I remember in a Caribbean T20 match, it was really, really interesting, close match. A guy hits a 4, ready 1, ready 2, ready 5, and 5 is the mid-wicket camera. And the two camera 2s followed the ball all the way to the boundary, runs over to the boundary. Normally, then I would have to, depending on which side of the field it was, have 5 follow the ball back. And I'm standing there watching it, and the ball stopped, over the rope. And I'm watching. And I'm thinking to myself, geez, we've been on this shot for a while. I wonder what. Oh, geez. I made the mistake of watching the cricket match instead of making a TV show. So my mistake was the ball was sitting up there for 6 or 7 or 8 seconds or 10 seconds when you should have been seeing the next sequence. So that happened a couple of times. So you realize that you can't be watching TV while you're directing. It sounds weird, but you can't. You've got to make sure that you're concentrating on every ball as much as you can. 50-over matches are really quite difficult because they generally run longer than Test match day, and they're obviously longer than a 20-over match day, unless you're doing two 20-over matches. But don't get caught watching TV is the mistakes that I'll tell people who are coming into the game.
So from that standpoint, it's almost like you're talking about it like a chessboard. You've got to be a few steps ahead of what the viewer is actually watching. So how many steps ahead do you feel you are in terms of giving direction to camera switches or camera angles or anything else in terms of being ahead? And does it lead you at any point in time or early on when you were first doing it, did you get discombobulated in a sense where your attention is elsewhere, trying to be 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead, that you're trying to juggle with one eye on this, one eye on that, and then all of a sudden it leads to mayhem?
Yeah, that's very true. You have to be a couple of steps ahead, but you don't want to get too far ahead, because you might start getting too far ahead where what you think is going to happen then doesn't happen. And then you do get upside down with the shots that you're doing and the time that you might have to put a replay in or not put a replay in. And that's why you have good people around you. The person who's actually doing hitting the buttons, the vision mixer, as they call them in Australia and England, and in the US business, they call the technical director, really the most important part of the entire show, in my opinion. And if you have a good one, then they'll cover up the mistakes you make. I have one of the best in the business is a lady called Evie Burnett, who is an Australian lady who does all sorts of coverage, but she's very good at cricket, and she's one of the first chosen by directors around the world. And Evie and I have done many, many shows together, and I feel confident having her next to me, because I know if I call for camera 4 and it's the wrong camera, she won't take it. She'll take the right one. So, she'll cover a mistake. And a lot of the technical directors won't do that. They'll just, whatever the director calls, what's it if it's wrong? You'll take the wrong shot and just not say anything. You don't want those people in the truck, because you want people around you who are willing to help you. So you have people who understand the game and understand the broadcast business that can help you get around it, because it doesn't matter how many times you've done it, you're gonna muck something up. You just can't help it, because there's so much going on, particularly when you have a lot of cameras. I mean, you were part of that broadcast in Morrisville, and you probably heard a few things coming from the truck that you don't always hear an everyday occurrence. But at the end of the day, it's another broadcast, another sporting event, and you just want to make it as smooth as possible. You're never going to have a show where there's no mistakes, but you try and cut down on them. The network people in the US tend to take it a little bit more seriously about, screaming at you if there's a mistake. But at the end of the day, I always say it's only TV and nobody got hurt, right?
I was going to say, the other sports I worked on going back to college, whether it's you or anybody else, I'm taken aback by how less I get yelled at. I'm expecting to get yelled at, and everybody's polite on the cricket broadcast. And I'm thinking, you guys need to be a bit more in my face to keep me in.
Well, I don't know if that works. And, you might just get up and walk away if I yelled at you, Peter. But but the thing is, part of it is too, that if you say something that I didn't really want you to say, if I start telling you now during the broadcast not to say this, not to say that, I'm distracted from doing something else.
Yeah.
So, and I've always been of the opinion that I want people who are listening to me at any given time during the show on the crew, I want them to be on my side rather than not on my side. I'd rather not be sabotaged by someone downstream who I've yelled at.
My favorite experience, I think, Peter, has to be, forget if it was the semifinals or if it was the week before, but there was a bit of gray area from my perspective in terms of when we were going to a genuine ad break at the end of an over versus when we were just kind of doing the visuals with the drone over the ground or whatever, and we could continue a conversation as opposed to cutting off with the over score to cut to a commercial break. And I thought we were going to stick and just continue the dialogue after the end of the over, after just taking a brief pause, whatever. And no, it was a situation where we were going to a Toyota ad break. And so there was a pause, and by Aman, I was working with Aman Patel. There was a pause, and I thought, I'm looking, and I thought we were sticking with the coverage on the ground. We weren't cutting into an ad break. So I'm continuing kind of the conversation that was the theme in the middle of the over. And all of a sudden in my ear, I hear you shout out, "Lay out, Peter, lay out, lay out, lay out, God damn it."
Yeah. Well, that might have been my fault in not giving you proper information. I'll accept the blame for that.
But I just thought, like, the whole time Peter's been pretty just straightforward with his instructions. All of a sudden, I'm just hearing Peter shout at the top of his lungs, lay out, goddamn.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, Toyota is the sponsor of the event, so we have to make sure they get their full value of their commercial. And the difference was there that for the minor league, we were running those commercials ourselves from the truck.
Yeah.
Whereas generally speaking, you're throwing to a broadcaster who's in a remote studio somewhere. And for Willow TV, we found out last year that we would have a person talking to them, letting them know when we're not on and when we're on. And it didn't seem to make any difference to the Indians in Bangalore who were taking our show. So we were thinking, oh, this is going to be a dog's breakfast when we look it back. And when we looked back at the replays from Willow, it was absolutely perfect. So it's sometimes a gray area. You just don't want to be talking when you shouldn't, and you should be talking when you should. So it's, again, it doesn't really worry me too much.
And for people who don't know, the technical term broadcasting layout means shut up. You're supposed to
shut the F up. Yeah.
Now, you said before, and this has kind of been a theme in a lot of the stuff you brought up, you've taken a lot of stuff from the U.S. broadcasting. You were trained kind of in the U.S. school of broadcast sports production, not the Australian school or not the British school or European school, or whatever. What do you think is the number one thing that you've learned stylistically from the kind of upbringing or the training in the U.S. style of sports broadcast production that you think has enhanced cricket broadcast that you might not see in a traditional cricket broadcast that's done in a style of the British school or the Australian school or any other kind of style of sports production?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know whether I could actually point to anything specifically. It's a combination of perhaps the order you do things leading into a broadcast, part of the pre-game show. Perhaps there is a little bit of a different approach in the US. During the show itself, I'm not sure that I could point to something specific. I know from doing cricket for a long time that there are certain protocols that are just set in stone the world over. And that wouldn't matter where you first learned your broadcasting. You just have to follow those protocols with the toss and the captain's interviews and all the things that lead into the first ball of the match. But the US tends to dress up the opening of shows a little bit differently, or a little bit more than say the UK or Australia or India, or with the exception of IPL, of course, which is a whole different animal. But I guess it's a long-winded way of evading the question, because I can't really say that there's that much difference between them. There's just difference in protocols that the way you lead into the sequence of shots that you're going to be showing, and how you start telling the story at the beginning of the match.
What have you not done in your broadcasting production career that you would like to do if you haven't gotten an opportunity to do so?
Well, I'd like to do a test match at Lord's.
You said you've done other stuff at Lord's, but not a test match.
I've done T20s at Lord's, but not a test match. Or I'd like to do a test match at Melbourne Cricket Ground. That would be great. But
you're a New South Welshman. Why the MCG?
Well, I mean, Sydney Cricket Ground's the best cricket ground in the world, because I mean we all know that. But I'd like to do it there too. But I'd like it to be in Melbourne because of the crowd. There with the crowd reactions. But yeah, Sydney Cricket Ground is home for me.
Why are the crowd reactions so integral to a sports broadcast? In the sense that, again, the pictures you talked about, and a lot of other people in sports production, pictures tell the story. It's hard to sell people on why sport is exciting if you're broadcasting from an empty cricket ground, whether that was during COVID or pre-COVID.
Yeah.
This doesn't look exciting. If you're trying to encourage people, or even just from a basic broadcast media rights standpoint, why would somebody pay for media rights if the picture that's being shown is an empty cricket ground? And at the most level, why are media rights valued? Why would a TV company pay for media rights? Because the demand has exceeded the supply. You've got more people interested in watching an event that can't buy a ticket, can't get into the venue. So you need to show it on TV to satisfy the demand. That's at a most basic elemental level. That's why media rights value. So if you're showing a game where there's nobody there, it's kind of hard to get people excited. Whereas if it's in a venue where, yeah, there's sold out or there's boisterous fans, whatever, it makes for a hell of a lot better picture storytelling. Why, from your perspective, are fans and doing crowd shots and all the things, the ancillary things that happen outside of the boundary rope or the sidelines or, you know, the field of play, what to you makes that such an essential part of any sports production?
Well, the energy level itself, I mean, people may not realize that the interactions of the crowd have a huge bearing on the actions of the players. It may not seem that way, but all the players will tell you who have played at the top level, they act and play differently when there is crowd interacting with them. Now, it's not always positive. I can tell you that from, you know, my friends in the Caribbean, when they first toured Australia and England, they were copying stuff from the crowd that they would rather not hear. Now, that's the negative side of it, and that can impact the way they play and the way they react, and that makes better television, in my opinion, rightly or wrongly. But if it's positive interaction, and if it's an excitement level, then the players are affected by that. And like you rightly point out, if there's no one in the crowd, they're playing to an empty grounds because of COVID or whatever, then that's not there and it's quiet. They're still playing, they're still going through the motions. The broadcasters, I don't think at the end of the day, mind as much as us who are actually doing the production, because there's more people watching if there aren't, in theory, if they're not at the ground. I guess everyone has to watch it on TV because they know they can't go because of COVID. Then the advertising revenue that they can put in, that they can get, is there because they've paid for the rights. But that could be that's the case when there's a crowd there or not a crowd. But the players themselves will tell you that their reactions to situations during the match are definitely impacted by what the crowd's doing at the time. And you know, you learn, you kind of notice that more when you're doing the broadcasting side of it rather than just watching it on TV. If you're at the ground at one of those very, very raucous games, you can feel an energy for it, and you know that there are players interacting with the crowd, particularly in the outfield. But from a broadcaster's point of view, anytime there's energy between the players on field and the crowd, positive or negative, makes a better story to tell. And it sounds trite and it sounds, you know, repetitive, but it is true. You can get a little bit more out of the TV broadcast if there is energy between the players and the crowd.
What would you say in terms of the percentages, if there is such a thing that you kind of contemplate or factor into your style of broadcasting, in terms of percentage of shots or the frequency of shots where you cut to a crowd shot, whether it's after a wicket or a four or whatever, that you feel adds to the broadcast?
Well, as the match is drawing to a close, there's more excitement. If there are sixes and fours being hit that gives the batting team a chance to win, then crowd shots then become more important. And I guess equally saying, if the wickets start to fall and the fielding team has a better chance of winning, particularly if it's at the home ground, the crowd shots are very important. My business partner, Kevin, who's been doing cricket longer than I have, he has one rule. He says, I hate crowd shots. And I go, why? Because he was the guy that had to shoot them when he was doing camera for all those years. And, you know, he's done every test match ground in the world. He's done Formula One. He's done everything. And he always didn't like the crowd shots, but I kind of like crowd shots because it adds to I think it does add to the show.
What else would you want people to know about the broadcasting industry from your perspective that they should know that would make them better appreciate the behind the scenes aspects of a production that gets projected on the front facing end?
People have probably heard this from, you know, many people. I don't know if I have anything extra to add. It's just that it's good to be anonymous is one of the things that I like, going back to first moving to the US. But in the broadcast, I don't want to be known as someone, oh, he's the guy that did the show. It's just, you're part of a group of people who bring this to the TV screen, and the people watching it, as long as they're happy, as long as they're willing to tune in next time, that's all you can hope for. I don't think I'm known for a particular style, or I'm known for doing really anything. I mean, the guys that I work in the business with know what I do, but I've always done other jobs as well. I haven't always been directing or producing. I don't think people at home watching actually care that much, Peter, to be honest, that, as long as they can open up a can of beer and watch the cricket, they don't care who's doing it or how they're doing it. As long as you get every catch, and as long as you show them a few good replays, I think they're happy.
All right, favorite 11 time with Peter Steep. 11 questions, cricket and non-cricket. Are you ready?
Go ahead.
Your favorite single game event broadcast you've ever worked on in your career?
Usain Bolt winning the 100 meters at the London Games in 2012.
Where were you when that was happening?
I was in the broadcast centre in London, only about in Stratford, and the arena was right next to us, so it was fairly close. That was hard to beat. Or perhaps, I didn't work on the Beijing game because I was doing cricket in the Caribbean at the time. No, so I would say Usain Bolt winning the 100. He's in London.
What is it like being in the broadcast center for an event or a moment like that, just in the build-up, and then when the event itself occurs? Because it's a very monumental event, but it only lasts for 9.5 seconds. So blink and you missed it. So how does that compare to being in the venue?
Well, the excitement level in a control room or in a broadcast area in general, it can be just as exciting as it is not just as exciting, but it's a very exciting thing. Everybody's glued to it. You want to do the TV part of it, but that's an exciting time to watch something like that. And then I went out a couple of days later and watched him in the 200 from the venue, and that was great too, because we had, I had access with the Olympic pass. I had access to some nice areas, and that was great too. But I didn't see it from a TV perspective. I was watching it there as the guy running past me. So it was hard to compare. But I mean, some of those big Olympic events are extraordinary.
Your favorite broadcast play-by-play caller, cricket or non-cricket? Who do you enjoy watching lead a broadcast?
My favorite would be the late Tony Cozier. He was the best I've heard, I think, in doing cricket coverage. He said he was the master of the non-statement, as he used to say. He said sometimes you can tell more of the story by not saying anything than you can by saying it. And I think he got that from Richie Benaud. But Tony Cozier, for sure, he was my favourite. And then that's for TV. For radio, I can go back into the dark ages before electricity, Peter. I can tell you that the sound of summer in Australia was...
Oh, don't hold back. Who is it?
Lindsay Hassett, who was the great player from the 40s in Australian team. Lindsay Hassett doing these colour commentary on the ABC radio. You'd be listening at the beach. That was another thing that sticks in my head too. But Tony Cozier for TV.
The radio, now you bring that up. I learned cricket. My education in cricket was like sped up 100-fold by listening to Jim Maxwell on the radio. I learned quickly to bring a radio with me because everybody else at the cricket ground but me had a radio. So I thought, I got to fit in. I got to get one. And not knowing the fielding positions and not knowing the nuances, hearing him call the play-by-play as the ball was running in and as the ball comes off the bat, and hearing him describe the fielding positions.
It's different, isn't it? Yeah.
That was what taught me so much about cricket, the descriptive element on radio that you don't get on TV necessarily at all times. My
dad used to turn off when the cricket was on at home. He'd turn off the TV coverage and just have the radio sitting on the top of the TV.
Your favorite thing to do? You've had plenty of these. Your favorite thing to do to pass the time on a 14-hour long-haul flight?
Well, apart from sleeping,
that can be at top of the list. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, I like listening to audiobooks. It passes the time for me really quickly. And then if I do fall asleep, I can wake up and I can just rewind and start again.
Your favorite cricket ground?
Oh, Sydney Cricket Ground for sure.
Why? Not just because it's your home.
Well, it was the first Test match that I ever went to, and it just has the feeling. I mean, I did a piece for the 2000 Olympics. A friend of mine and I did some behind the scenes, like Experience Australia type pieces for NBC, and one of them was a little thing on Australian sports, and we did it at the Sydney Cricket Ground, and that was that's 20 years ago, but it reminded me a lot of my youth, listening to the radio on cricket and watching it on TV. Sydney Cricket Ground is just a very special place. It really is. It's much more intimate, even though it's not that. Well, I guess it is smaller than Melbourne Cricket Ground, but Melbourne Cricket Ground's a little bit too cavernous for it to be personal.
Now, I'll add a 4A layer on top of this question. What is your favorite cricket ground to do a broadcast production from, where the broadcast elements are easily set up and configured to make your job as easy as possible?
Well, that would be Lord's, of course. Yeah.
Your favorite cricketer of all time?
Doug Walters.
Dougie Walters.
KD Walters from Dungog. Dashing Doug from Dungog. Yeah, he was great. He was a great character on and off the field. He was one of the throwbacks to the time when there was a little bit less emphasis placed on fitness and after play activities. If you get my drift, he was famous for starting a game of cribbage in the dressing room on the morning of a test match. Australia wins the toss, they're batting. Doug would bat 4 or 5 generally in the order. And the wickets fell. He would have the cigarette. He'd have the Rothman cigarette. If the wicket fell and he was up next, he'd have the pads on, be playing cribbage with the other guys. And he'd say to the guy, he'd put the cigarette down in the ashtray, and he says, "Don't go past my turn for the deal, because I might be back shortly." And then he'd go out and make 100, of course, then he'd come back. But he was one of those guys that, drink all night and play great cricket all day.
Your favorite non-cricket athlete of all time?
Babe Dickerson.
One more time.
Babe Zaharias. Babe Zaharias.
Oh, Babe Dickerson Zaharias.
Yeah.
Now, Peter, you're not old enough to have seen her play.
No, I'm not. But I've just in having done some, producing the Story of Golf documentary for PBS. That was one of the most interesting stories I ever heard. What she did and what she had to go through. She's one of the great ones. But I guess golf.
The U.S. cricket team could have used Babe Dickerson Zaharias.
Yeah. Yeah, she was something, that one. And Kathy Freeman's too. Kathy Freeman's story is always a good one. She shot to fame early and did what she did in Sydney.
Your favorite place to eat out on tour?
A little bar in Antigua called Putters. Great people, and the food's great, and they're cricket tragics, of course.
Your favorite beverage of any kind, alcoholic, non-alcoholic?
I guess it'd have to be Chewy's Old beer and New South Wales beer.
Your favorite pizza topping?
Sausage. Margarita with sausage. That'll do me.
Your favorite movie of all time? And not Crocodile Dundee, not one that you've worked on.
No. Favorite film would be Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, wow.
David Lean's film.
Digging deep. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
The David Lean epics. Big fan.
Yeah. Bridge on the River Kwai was another good one.
Your last but not least, your favorite show to binge watch, whether it's Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Paramount Plus, any other streaming service du jour.
Yeah.
What's your go-to? When an episode comes on, you just can't turn it off.
Well, you have to say that about Seinfeld, right? I mean, it's like they're still funny 25 years later. Don't really get into a lot of the series per se that are made specifically for that. There have been some good ones. Mad Men was good. I like that a lot. And I guess we did binge watch that. Just watch one more episode. But I think in terms of stuff coming on TV now that you can't get, if you're flipping around and you can't go past, it has to be Seinfeld.
I wonder now if people growing up now would appreciate all the George Steinbrenner related humor on that show with George working for the Yankees.
That's right. That was so great. And of course, there was an episode where Jerry had a reference to cricket too. I'll have to go and try and dig that up. And I love his description of Australia. He says, "Oh, you guys have that flag, right?" He says it's like Great Britain, but at night, which I think is very, very funny and sharp. The Union Jack with the stars on it. It's just a very great observation, Jerry.
I've never heard that one before, but that is a classic.
Like Great Britain, but at night.
I can't find any other way to describe it now that it's in my head.
Yeah.
Peter Steep, thank you so much for coming on the Stars and Stripes Cricket
Thank
Podcast.
you.
Give you the final word. Anything else that you want to say about yourself that people don't already know about you that you think they should
I
know?
think I've probably said too much, Peter, anyway, all along, but I do thank you for having me. And I've watched a lot of your podcasts, and maybe this is one that I'll miss.
I appreciate you supporting the podcast. I know you're a Patreon supporter and watching the podcast in general and everything else that you do in the cricket world to make it a bigger, better sport in America and beyond, but especially in the U.S. cricket community. I think it was great for me, at least, to get to learn a bit more about you, and hopefully other people who are watching or listening to this feel the same way, because there's an awful lot of people behind the scenes who play huge roles in the American cricket community that not a lot of people get to hear from, and you're one of those people. And I had a lot more questions. We could have gone on for another hour or two at least, Peter, but I got to pick up my daughter from school.
Yeah, you better go and do the things you need to do, Peter. You got to go and answer all your fan mail about the Mancat too. So,
That's true. Yes, I've got to pick up my daughter, and then I've got to get back to doing screenshots about the Mancats and the latest player who's leaving the non-strikers end early.
But I'm definitely on your side about it. If the batsman has to stay behind, if the bowler has to stay behind the line to bowl, why shouldn't the batsman? It's simple.
Well, and again, it's like that in any other sport. You know, football, watch the NFL every weekend, every single time. Offside, encroachment, false start, illegal motion.
It's in the rules.
There's no exceptions. Zero exceptions are made, and there is a line there. Why is the line there if it's not meant to be rejected?
Literally a line. There is literally a line that you can't cross.
All right, Peter. Thank you again.
Peter. All right. Talk to you soon.
My thanks again to Peter Steep for coming on the podcast and giving us some insights, not just about his time with Alan Stanford, but all the stuff that he does behind the scenes that have made a pretty big impact on the American cricket community from a broadcasting perspective over the last couple decades, and he's going to keep on trucking along in that regard. Want to remind everybody, if you haven't already done so, to please support the podcast by going to patreon.com, become a Patriot. For as little as $3 a month, you help keep the podcast going on an episode-by-episode basis. And I also want to remind everybody to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube if you enjoy the video format, or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, and other podcasting platforms. That's it for this episode. I'm Peter Della Penna, reminding everybody, God bless America, and God bless American cricket.